After the miscarriage, I systematically erased every habit that Giles used to find irritating. I stopped asking where he was going when he stayed out all night. I no longer paced the floor. I simply turned off the bedside lamp and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, even when I was injured during a training maneuver. And the medic told me to call my family. I just looked at the sterile white ceiling and said, I don't have any next of kin. The nurse recognized me. You're Mrs. Marshall, aren't you? General Marshall is just in the next sector over. Should I send word to him? I shook my head slowly. Thumper? There is no need. But 30 minutes later, Giles Marshall appeared anyway. He stood in the doorway, his uniform sharp, his presence commanding and cold. You're hurt. Why wasn't I the first person you called? I kept my eyes down. It's a scratch.
Giles.
Not worth bothering the commanding general over. That dismissive tone, the sheer lack of weight in my voice, made him visibly bristle. Before he could snap back, voices drifted in from the hallway. 2 guards were gossiping, unaware of who was listening. The general really has a soft spot for that girl, Maya from the Yuzo troupe. She twisted her ankle during the performance, and he practically commandeered a Black Hawk just to get her back. Carried her onto the bird himself. Didn't let her feet touch the tarmac once. I saw Giles's chest tighten. His eyes flickered toward me, searching for the explosion, the accusations, the familiar fire of my jealousy. But my lashes didn't even quiver. I just leaned back against the thin hospital mattress and closed my eyes, letting the silence settle between us. It wasn't until we were in his military jeep that he finally spoke, his voice a low growl of defense. Don't listen to the gossip. It was professional. Maya was invited here to perform for the troops. She got hurt on my watch. It was my responsibility to handle it. Okay, I said softly. I didn't add anything else. Kyle's temper flared suddenly. You don't believe me? Is this still about that? God, Cassie. I've come back to you. I'm here. What more do you want? I stared out the window at the passing barracks. My profile, a blank slate. I believe you, I said. I just didn't think I was an emergency. I didn't want to interrupt your work. Let's just go back to the quarters. Same scripted response. Autopilot. Giles slammed his fist against the steering wheel. The horn blared a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the winter air, startling a group of performers who were just finishing their set. Across the road, one girl looked up. As the moonlight hit her face, the air inside the jeep turned to ice. Maya, what is she still doing out here? Giles muttered. He glanced at me instinctively. In the past, every time I saw her, I'd lose my mind.
Ides crem. Ides RY.
I demand to know why she was wearing a coat that looked like mine. But now I just gave her a fleeting glance and looked away. Nothing. Giles grips the wheel, but his eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. It was a brutal December night. The girl was shivering in a thin stage costume, her arms wrapped tight around herself, her nose red from the cold. His hand was already on the door handle. The concern was practically leaking out of him. I understood the script perfectly. I opened my door and stepped out, giving him the exit he was dying for. If you need to do a final sweep of the camp, I can walk back. It is not far. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned toward the intersection. Giles jumped out and caught my wrist. It over between us. Cassie? I didn't know she was here. Why won't you trust me? I nodded. I do trust you, Giles. She's a young girl in a tough spot. Even if it's over, it's normal to care. I get it. He stared at my face. There was no bitterness there. No hidden edge. That was what terrified him. I used to have an insatiable hunger for his attention. If I found a single long hair on his uniform, I'd interrogate him until dawn. Now I was exactly what he'd always begged me to be. Reasonable, quiet, undemanding. But it felt like he was breathing through wet cotton. I pulled my hand back and walked away. At the corner, I stopped and looked back. Beside the jeep, Giles had already draped his heavy coat over Maya's shoulders. He was cupping her face in his hands, leaning down to kiss her with a desperation that looked like pain. I wasn't surprised. I should have seen it coming. I certainly wasn't going to be the woman I was. The first time I caught him, the crazy wife screaming, Giles, have you no shame? I've been with you since I was 18. We had nothing. And now you tell me you love someone else? Back then, he had looked at the blood on his lip, where I'd struck him, and sneered, shame? You want to talk about shame? You were sleeping with me at 18. Your own parents didn't even want you. I'm the one who took you out of that state home. I've raised you for a decade. You should be thanking me. That sentence had been a poison blade, shredding 12 years of shared struggles, of shivering together in foxholes and building a life from dust. Me phone vibrated, pulling me out of the graveyard of my memories. Colonel Miller, the personal effects and pension documents for your biological parents have been verified. When can you come to the West Coast Command to finalize the claim? I pulled my sleeve down to cover the faint white scar on my wrist. 10 days. My divorce papers finished processing in 10 days. The voice on the line hesitated. You and General Marshall. It's been a long time. You can inherit the estate and the honors without transferring units. I watched the lights of the base fade in the distance. I don't love him anymore, I said. I just want to go home to a place I've never been. Back at the officers' quarters, the first thing I saw was our wedding photo on the wall. We looked so young. Giles was laughing, his nose pressed affectionately against my temple. We grew up together in the state foster system. When I was 18, the director tried to marry me off to a bitter, middle-aged sergeant just to get me off the books. Giles was the one who grabbed my hand and helped me scale the back wall. The director had screamed after us. Giles Marshall, you think you can protect her forever? He had looked back, his eyes blazing with a reckless, beautiful light. Watch me. He used his enlistment bonus to rent the cheapest basement apartment in the city. Once I'm through basic training and get my stripes, you can come with me as a registered dependent, he promised. No one will ever take you away again. For the first 3 years, he crawled through the mud in ranger school. Before every jump, every dangerous op, he tucked my photo into his breast pocket, right over his heart. I worked a desk job in logistics, saving every penny. During the leanest winters, we'd share a single bowl of instant noodles on New Year's Eve and feel like royalty. Then, he made special forces. I moved into intelligence. We traded the basement for a dorm, the dorm for a house, and finally for this villa. The stars on Giles's shoulders got brighter, and the colleagues around him started looking different, until the day I found a smudge of lipstick on the inside of his collar. A girl tripped backstage at the gallop. I helped her up. It was an accident. He'd snapped, ripping his tie off. Cassie, you're a soldier, too. Stop acting like a paranoid housewife. Do soldiers not betray people? Giles? We said forever. Not forever. Until it gets boring. The screaming matches became our new language. I tracked his missions, his call logs. Even snuck to the edge of the training grounds. When he claimed he was pulling an all-nighter, Giles, out of spite, leaned into it. He cycled through women, sometimes coming home with scratches on his back, just to see me break.
Satisfied.
He'd sneer, you wanted to find something. Now you have. I felt like a ghost. When I should leave, but unable to find the door. 12 years meant we were grafted together. Tearing apart meant losing skin. But a year ago, he changed. He cleared out the flings. He kept only one. When I saw Maya's photo, I collapsed. That face. She looked exactly like I did at 18, innocent, wide-eyed, untouched by the world. Giles would rather love a ghost of me than the woman I had become. To survive him. That night, I sat in a bathtub and opened my veins. Giles broke the door down, his hands shaking so hard he could barely apply the tourniquets. He carried me into the ER, his eyes bloodshot and terrifying. Cassie, are you insane? We'll fix it. I promise. Just you and me. No one else. Ever again. I lay in that hospital bed feeling nothing but a profound, hollow exhaustion. That was the day the JAG officer found me. He handed me a yellowed file. Colonel Miller. The department reinvestigated the casualty lists from the 984 border conflict. These 2 officers, they were your biological parents. I held the file, my fingers icy. After I hung up, I walked to the window of my private room. In the garden below, Giles was holding Maya.
I'm sorry, Maya.
She's unstable. Post-traumatic stress. I can't leave her like this.
Not now.
But trust me, once she's settled, I'll make it right for us. They kissed like star-crossed lovers. In that moment, the graft finally failed. Skin tore away. The hole in my chest was so large. I couldn't even make a sound on my 7th day in the hospital. I realized the truth. I had to kill the woman who loved Giles Marshall. To let the daughter of heroes live for a week. Giles didn't come home.
I didn't ask.
I filed the divorce papers and the transfer request through official channels and started packing. I decided to return the keys to our first apartment, the small temporary housing we'd kept for years as a storage unit, to the base housing office. When I arrived at the unit with the housing clerk, the door was slightly ajar. I heard a woman's soft laugh and a man's rhythmic, heavy breathing. Through the crack in the door, I saw a discarded USO uniform on the floor. Giles had Maya pinned against the wall, his tactical pants around his knees. He was wearing his wedding ring. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a slow breath, and pulled the door closed. I turned to the clerk. I'm sorry. Today isn't a good day for the inspection. Let's do it another time. The clerk was a young officer. She'd heard the noises. She looked at me with a mix of pity and horror. Colonel Miller, do you want me to report this? I shook my head. Amber? It's a private matter. Let's not bother the command.
What?
What was the point of bursting in? To scream like a banshee? To beg him? To remember our years in the trenches? A man whose heart has moved on is just an empty shell. You don't fight over a shell. I hurried down the stairs. But Giles came charging out after me. His shirt untucked, his breath ragged. Cassie, what are you doing? Here. What did you hear? I pulled my wrist away, my face a mask of calm. I was dropping off the keys. The door was closed, so I left. He let out a visible breath of relief, thinking I was just being sentimental about our old place. I was on maneuvers all week. Just got back. Maya needed a place to rehearse. So I let her use the key. Don't overthink it. I didn't bother pointing out the lie. I turned to leave. Suddenly, the sound of glass shattering erupted from inside the apartment, followed by the roar of a flash fire. Giles's face transformed. He grabbed my jaw, his eyes burning with a terrifying rage. Did you do this, Cassie? His fingers dug into my jaw, the pressure hard enough to leave bruises by nightfall. His eyes were wild, searching my face for the familiar spark of madness, the jealous, vindictive woman who would absolutely torture Room to make him pay. He was desperate to find her. If I was the arsonist, it meant I still cared. It meant I was still his. I didn't wince. I didn't even blink. I just looked at the hand gripping my face like it was an unfamiliar species of insect. Before I could open my mouth, the young housing clerk stepped forward. Her voice shook, but her military bearing held. General Marshal, sir. Colonel Miller was with me in the stairwell the entire time. She never crossed the threshold. Giles froze. The sheer authority in the junior officer's defense snapped him back to reality. His grip on my jaw slackened, his fingers trembling as he pulled his hand away. Inside the apartment, the smoke alarm began to shriek. Maya came stumbling out into the hallway, coughing violently. She was frantically trying to pull Giles's oversized tactical jacket over her shoulders to cover her bare legs. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her stage makeup. Giles, she sobbed, throwing herself at his chest. I was trying to light the old kerosene heater. I knocked it over when I heard the door. I was so scared, Giles. Giles caught her instinctively, but his eyes never left my face. He looked sick. The smoke billowed out into the sterile hallway, carrying the smell of burning carpet and the cheap, sweet perfume Maya wore. Are you okay? I asked. The question hung in the air, quiet and completely devoid of malice. Giles swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Cassie. He started, his voice cracking. If you need medical assistance, the clerk can call the medics. I continued smoothly, turning to the young officer. Lieutenant, please pull the fire alarm and contact base security. The general has a situation he needs handled. Yes, ma'am, the clerk said, darting down the hall to the pull station. I looked back at Giles. He was holding the shivering girl, but he looked like a man drowning. I gave him a polite, brief nod. I'll leave the keys at the front desk. Have a good afternoon, General. Cassie, wait, he shouted over the blaring siren. He took a step toward me, practically dragging Maya with him, but the first responders were already rushing up the stairs, forcing him to step back to clear the way. I didn't turn around. I walked out of the building, into the crisp winter air, and took a deep breath. My lungs filled with oxygen, clean and cold. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't smell Giles's cologne on my skin. 7 days remained. My transfer to the West Coast Command was moving with terrifying efficiency, expedited by the personal intervention of a 3-star admiral who had served with my biological father. To the base at large, I was just doing routine administrative work. To Giles, I was just sulking. He didn't come back to our villa for 3 days. I knew his playbook. He was giving me time to cool off, waiting for the inevitable moment I would crack and call him, begging him to come home so we could scream, cry, and eventually collapse into each other's arms. That was our cycle. The violence of our arguments was the only way he knew how to feel loved. On the 4th night, he finally walked through the front door. I was sitting at the dining table, quietly sorting through a box of classified files I needed to hand over to my successor in intelligence. The house was spotless. I had spent the weekend packing my personal belongings into 3 nondescript duffel bags, which were now locked in the trunk of my car. The only things left in the house were the things Giles had bought me. He walked in, dropping his kit bag by the door. He looked exhausted. He had a bandage on his hand from the fire, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He stood in the archway of the dining room, waiting for the interrogation, waiting for the screaming match about the housing unit. I looked up, flipped a file closed, and took a sip of my water. There's leftover roast in the fridge. You'll need to microwave it. Giles stared at me. He unbuttoned his collar slowly. Cassie, we need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to talk about, I said, not looking up from my paperwork. It was an accident. The base fire chief cleared it. No charges were filed against Ms. Maya. Stop it, he snapped, his voice sharp, echoing in the empty room. He marched over to the table and slammed his hand down on my files. Stop doing this. Stop acting like you don't care. It's unnatural. You walked in on me, Cassie. Yell at me. Throw a plate. Do something. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who had pulled me over a brick wall when I was 18. The man who had fed me instant noodles in a freezing basement. He looked older now. The ruthless ambition that had once been so beautiful just looked like arrogance. I don't throw plates anymore, Giles, I said softly. I'm 30 years old. You're my wife, he roared, his face flushing red. And I screwed up. I admit it. I screwed up. Maya, she's nothing. She's just a kid. She's clingy and she's terrified of the dark and she cries when she breaks a nail. She's not you. She's exactly who I was. I corrected him calmly. When you met me, you don't want a wife, Giles. You want a rescue dog. You want someone who looks at you like you're God, because you saved them from the MUD. But I grew up. I became a colonel. I learned how to save myself. And you couldn't stand it. Giles recoiled as if I had physically struck him.
His chest heaved.
That's not true. I gave you everything. You did, I agreed. And I paid you back with 12 years of absolute devotion. We're even. I stood up, gathering my files. Cassie, he reached out, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. He caught my wrist, his thumb brushing over the faint white scar from where I had tried to end my life a year ago. He looked at the scar, his eyes filling with tears.
Please.
I'm ending it with her. I'll send her back to the civilian sector tomorrow. Just don't look at me with those dead eyes. I gently pulled my wrist from his grasp. It didn't take much effort. Good night, Giles. I walked upstairs, locked the door to the guest room, and fell into a dreamless sleep. Outside the door, I heard him slide down the wall and sit on the floor, breathing heavily in the dark. I felt no urge to open the door. The graft was completely dead. 3 days left. I was summoned to the JAG office to finalize the inheritance paperwork. Major Vance, a stern man with silvering hair, slid a thick leather-bound folder across the desk. Colonel Miller, the Joint Chiefs have officially unsealed the records of Operation Nightfall. Your biological parents, Captain Elias Thorne and Major Sarah Thorne, did not die in a routine ambush as previously recorded. They held a critical choke point against an overwhelming force for 48 hours, allowing the evacuation of 300 Allied noncombatants. Vance paused, looking at me with a profound, quiet respect. They were awarded the Medal of Honor, posthumously. The records were classified until the geopolitical situation stabilized. As their only living next of kin, their pensions, back pay, and the estate they left behind, which has been accumulating in a blind trust for 30 years, are yours. I touched the embossed leather of the folder. For my entire life, I had believed I was trash left in a dumpster. I had let the state home beat me down, and I had let Giles Marshall convince me that without him, I was nothing but dirt. But I had sniper's blood in my veins. I was the daughter of lions. Thank you, Major, I whispered, pulling the folder into my lap. And my transfer? Approved at the highest levels, Vance confirmed with a tight smile. West Coast Command is eager to have you. You'll depart on Friday at 0600. Have you informed General Marshall? He will be notified through standard operational channels, I replied. Vance nodded knowingly. Understood. The divorce decree will hit his desk on Thursday afternoon at 1700 hours. Exactly 1 hour before your security clearance to this base is permanently revoked. Thursday arrived with an unnatural calm. The sky over the base was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening snow. I spent the day in my office, clearing out my hard drives and wiping my terminal. At 1600 hours, I handed my sidearm and base ID to the armory. I was officially a ghost in this sector. Across the base, in the command center, Giles was conducting a briefing. I knew his schedule by heart. He would finish at 1645. He would return to his office. His adjutant would hand him the day's physical mail and urgent dispatches. At 1705, my phone rang. It wasn't a call. It was a text from Giles. What is this? Cassie, where are you? 5 seconds later, the phone began to vibrate violently. Incoming call. Giles Marshall. I watched the screen light up in the dimming light of my empty office. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. I picked up my coat and walked out to my car. As I started the engine, the radio crackled to life, playing a soft jazz tune. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the base's main gate. By the time I reached the checkpoint, the base sirens weren't blaring, but the military police at the gate looked tense. The guard checked my temporary transit pass, his eyes darting to his radio.
Mom?
We just got a priority hold request from General Marshall's office. He's asking all gates to stall Colonel Miller's departure. I rolled my window down further, letting the freezing wind hit my face. I handed the young guard a piece of paper bearing the golden seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the signature of the West Coast Admiral. "Corporal," I said, my voice projecting the absolute authority of my rank. "This is a Level 1 priority transfer authorized by the Pentagon. General Marshall's regional command does not supersede it. Open the gate." The corporal looked at the seal, swallowed hard, and saluted. "Yes, ma'am. Safe travels, Colonel." The iron gates began to slide open. Just as my tires rolled over the threshold, a black military SUV came careening around the corner, its tires screaming against the asphalt. It slammed on the brakes, stopping inches from my rear bumper. Giles threw the door open before the vehicle had even fully stopped. He was in his dress uniform, clutching a manila folder in his hand. "The divorce papers." "Cassie," he bellowed, sprinting toward my car. The MPs at the gate immediately stepped forward, hands resting nervously on their weapons. I stopped the car. I didn't have to, but I owed the 18-year-old girl I used to be a proper burial. I stepped out of the vehicle, the cold wind whipping my hair around my face. Giles stopped a few feet away, chest heaving, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. He held up the papers, his hand shaking so violently the pages rustled. "What is this?" he choked out, his voice entirely stripped of its commanding bass. "A divorce? A transfer? You can't do this. I didn't authorize this." "You aren't in my chain of command anymore, General," I said, my tone conversational. "And as of 10 minutes ago, you aren't my husband."
No.
He took a step forward, grabbing my shoulders.
No, Cassie.
"You're just angry. You're punishing me. I get it." I broke it off with Maya. "I swear to God, I threw her off the base today. I sent her away. It's over. It's just us now. Like we promised. We built this life together from the dirt. You built a cage," I corrected gently, looking at the man I had worshipped for over a decade. "And I stayed in it because I thought it was the only place I belonged. You kept telling me I was nothing without you. But Giles, you were wrong." I reached into my coat and pulled out the leather folder containing my parents' files. I pressed it against his chest. "I know who I am now. I am the daughter of Captain Elias and Major Sarah Thorne. I am a colonel in the United States Armed Forces. And I am entirely, irrevocably done with you." Giles looked down at the folder, recognizing the legendary names. The color completely drained from his face. The power dynamic, the very foundation of his control over me, shattered into a million irreparable pieces in his hands. He wasn't the savior anymore. He was just a man who had abused a legacy he couldn't comprehend. "Cassie, please," he whispered, falling to his knees right there on the frozen tarmac, in front of the MPs, in front of the world. The great General Marshall, crying like a child. "I don't know how to do this without you. You're my compass. You're my skin." "Then you'll bleed," I said softly. I didn't feel triumph.
I didn't feel joy.
I just felt a profound, beautiful emptiness. I turned around, got back into my car, and put in drive. In the rearview mirror, I watched him kneeling on the ground, surrounded by guards who were too embarrassed to look at him. He got smaller and smaller until the road curved, and he disappeared completely. 6 months later, the sun over the Pacific Ocean was blindingly bright. The air smelled of salt, eucalyptus, and freedom. I stood on the balcony of my new quarters at the West Coast Command, holding a steaming mug of coffee. My hair was longer now, no longer pinned into the severe, tight bun Giles used to demand. I was wearing a loose civilian sweater. I had spent the morning reviewing intelligence reports for the Pacific Fleet, a job that challenged me and thrilled me in ways my old logistical desk never did. A knock on the door broke my reverie. My adjutant, a bright-eyed lieutenant named Harris, walked in with the morning dispatch. "Morning, Colonel Thorne," he said cheerfully. I had officially taken my parents' surname 3 months ago. "Morning, Harris. Anything critical?" "Just standard fleet movements, ma'am." "Oh," and the quarterly disciplinary bulletin from Central Command came through. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, knowing my history, but I had made it clear that I was not to be treated with kid gloves. "Go ahead," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Major General Giles Marshall has been officially relieved of his command," Harris read, keeping his tone professional. "Citing erratic behavior, failure to maintain unit cohesion, and conduct unbecoming. He's been forcibly retired. They're moving him to a desk at the VA to quietly ride out his pension." I looked out at the rolling blue waves. There's a time when hearing that Giles's career had imploded would have sent me into a spiral of panic. I would have felt guilty, assuming it was my duty to fix him. Now, it was just a weather report from a city I no longer lived in. "Understood," I said. "File it with the rest. What time is the briefing with the Admiral?"
400, ma'am.
"Excellent. I'll be ready." Harris saluted and left the office. I turned back to the ocean, resting my forearms on the balcony railing. I thought about the 18-year-old girl who had shivered in a basement, terrified that the world would throw her away. I thought about the woman who had bled out in a bathtub, convinced she wasn't enough. I raised my coffee mug to the horizon, to the ghosts of my parents I had never met but who had saved me from beyond the grave. The wind blew, carrying away the last phantom traces of ash and gunpowder. I closed my eyes, smiled, and listened to the sound of the tide. I was finally home,